up in the morning slaving for bread, sir, so that every mouth can be fed. Oh, me Israelites, get up in the morning slaving for bread, sir, so that every mouth can be fed.
Vampire Weekend.
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 New York City's own Vampire Weekend.
They met a decade ago as undergraduates at Columbia University. Bass player Chris Baio,
Chris.
drummer Chris Thompson,
Also Chris.
guitarist Rastam Batmanglij,
Rastam.
and lead singer Ezra Koenig
Ezra.
played their first show here in 2006.
I mean, I always liked that phrase. And on the most basic, stupid level, it just sounded like a Vampire Weekend album title. Modern vampires of the city, like it almost just seems like a description. And then, you know, of course, to me, the vampire is a metaphor. And we've never cared about literal vampires, Dracula and whoever.
We spent about a year just songwriting and just collecting ideas and not stopping the writing process until we were at a place where we were like, okay, we have enough.
We had this name, sounded like could be an album. But then we didn't, you never know if it's going to fit. But then nobody could agree that that should be the title in the beginning. So we, you know, just worked on the album, kept it in the back of our minds.
We think about, you know, things we've done before, wanting to take it to the next level, not wanting to stay on a plateau. It informs our decision making.
We have for you this week a special program of the highlights of the Lighthouse benefit given by the Vineyard Environmental Research Institute. So sit back and enjoy.
We wrote most of it in New York. Took a little trip to Martha's Vineyard, wrote some more songs there.
I think we realized that there's no easy way to arrive at having 12 songs that you found that you're very proud of. There's no shortcuts that can be taken.
Before that, songs would usually just come to us. We never had to work to write the songs. We'd work a lot to finish them, but you know, we never had to go somewhere to write. And it turned out to be perfect. We went there and we ended up kind of writing the last 3 songs for the album.
When you were a child, you were treated kind, but never brought up right. You were always smart with 1,000 toys, and still you cried all night. Your mother who neglected you.
How does Ellen here? Turn on the air.
It's on full blast. Go get ready.
Open the door at least.
No, don't. The radio said there's a smog emergency. The air's toxic. I don't want that in here.
Rustin finds the album cover, this image, the kind of mystical, hazy image of New York from a kind of unusual angle, not the typical angle you see the skyline from. The title starts to sound a little better, and then even like little things like choosing a font. How should we write the album title? We figure out how to write it, and suddenly it starts to sound even better. And then by the end of it, you make the whole album, and then you make the final decision. Is this album called Modern Vampires of the City?
I don't like this idea that we are always talking about how hard the album was to make, because really there were moments where we were flying, and it felt like the most wonderful and natural and easy thing in the world. Some of those moments are complete accidents, but you have to put in the hours to get there. You have to put in all that hard work just to have those accidental moments that are so meaningful.
If you'd asked me, back in the Contra days, how quickly do you want to get your next album out, I would have said something much shorter than 3.5 years. But now that we're here, it feels about right, and it's good that we took our time with it.
Somebody asked me if I believed in serendipity, and I'd never thought about it. This was a few years ago, and I realized I do, because if we hadn't all been in Columbia, we wouldn't have met each other, and we wouldn't have inspired each other in the way that we have.
Your mother who neglected you owes $1 million tax, and your father.
Is this album necessarily darker? I think there are dark moments on the other two albums, but this one, maybe the general feeling comes across kind of differently, but that's how it has to happen.
Here it comes your 19th birthday.
Grammy goes to... Okay, Modern Vampires of the City, Vampire Weekend.
Thanks a lot. You guys want to say anything else?
We're good, thank you so much. Hi, Mom and Dad.
The story behind that song is that it started with this piano and these very, very complicated drums that I recorded and I sent to Ezra, and he started writing on top of it. And then once we sort of written the song, we realized that we didn't need those complicated drums anymore. So it was Ezra's idea to try incorporating some Nyabingi drums, which are a traditional Jamaican drumming practice.
Hey guys. We'll play more than this. Okay? How about
Mornings come, you watch the red sunrise. The LED still flickers in your eyes. Oh, you ought to spare your face the raisin, because no one's gonna spare the time for you. No one's gonna watch you as you go from a house you didn't build and can't control. Oh, you ought to spare your face the raisin, because no one's gonna spare the time for you.
Our music is always going to be, to some extent, about the connections that we see between different types of music or ideas that seem distinct, but probably are more interrelated than most people realize. So, to some extent, I mean, American music is a product of these connections between different cultures. I mean, everybody who's American has probably some form of dual identity. I mean, even, first and foremost, I'm an American, but of course we all kind of, people are interested in tracing our roots and things like that. So, primarily Americana music sometimes seems like this very simple, boring thing, but really, I think if you look at it and listen to it with fresh ears, it's kind of amazing, all the ways that, things like gospel and bluegrass and country music came together.
I was a bedroom recorder. I was a 4-track kid. I was someone who made beats from the time I was 14, and I also was recording these kind of like experiments of like live instruments.
Talking about the big picture ideas is a big part of how we've always operated, and it's how we met as friends, was enjoying, even before we really made a lot of music together, we enjoyed just listening to music and talking about music. And I don't know if you I hope that doesn't make it sound like too nerdy, but that's a component of our band, is the thought process of what our music means. So in some big picture way, I think like the talking and thinking is a big part of how we make what we do.
general, just being in a band is kind of about getting to inject your personal style into this thing that you share, whether it's aesthetic, musical, fashion. It's all about personal style. Ezra was one of the only Jews in his town, and I was one of the only Iranians in Georgetown, where I grew up. So we had this, like, a little bit of a fire that you get, I think, from being an outsider. And that does kind of inspire us.
Pretty funny to even think that there was a time when 4 guys wearing button-down shirts was in any way some kind of statement. But it almost, I think at that time it almost felt that way.
Rustam sent me the original music for that song, and over a pretty long time I'd listen to it and slowly start to write some lyrics and stuff. And even then, when I was first kind of just messing around with it, I always just had a feeling it would be the track 1 on the next album. Something about it just seemed like track 1.
A lot of the production ideas started in New York with me on my own and working with the band and me and Ezra working together, and then we sort of continued the second phase of making the album in LA. And Ariel Rekscheid, who's been a good friend for a while, came in and the two of us co-produced all the songs on the album together.
Payne Stewart is the 1999 U.S. Open champion. Oh my!
We were all sitting together, me, Ezra, and Ariel Rekscheid, who produced the album with me. He was in front of the computer, and we were trying to figure out how to make that baby, baby, baby part more exciting.
It's this box that Boss made in the 90s called a VT1 that has a lot of vocal effects, and basically it's almost like it's mimicking the way that your vocal cords change. That's kind of the reason why an old man's voice sounds different than a young kid's.
That song started with this idea for a punk song with saxophone. And I felt possessed that I wanted to record that, so I called up my friend who played sax, and he came to my apartment, and I sort of mocked up some punk drums and a chord progression, and I had him come and record the sax parts, and then it was just something that I had, and I just didn't know what to do with it, so I sent it to Ezra. I was like, you want to try writing something?
And I started singing some kind of lyric about it. If Diane Young, but then I was like, yeah, but he also kind of sounds like Diane Young, like a name. And I thought, which is better? And I meant, the name is so much better. I like the idea that Diane Young would be the personification of dying young. It's like some kind of Greek mythology type thing.
The song isn't successful to us, isn't worth putting on an album to us unless it satisfies certain goals that are maybe more conceptual, and on another level, it has to also succeed on is it a catchy song? Does it stick in your head? You can't just throw African music and classical music together.
Baby, right on time.
the musical architect and producer. Koenig, the lyricist, who can weave startling rhymes like this one.
Every time I see you in the world, you always step to my girl.
That idea of a song full of references, it can be, when it's done right, it can be the best thing in the world. And you know, when I think of songs that I like that are full of references, or it's really like becomes a text that you can study, and it's exciting to see where everything comes from. And just throwing a bunch of shit together is not always interesting, but if you can use that as a tool to convey some sort of meaning, then it really does feel powerful.
In my family, we spent a lot of time in the kitchen, and there was always music playing in the kitchen. And I remember very vividly that music.
Allowing Jose Canseco to score, and he fails to get Dave Parker at second base, so the Oakland A's take.
I'll tell you what, we're having an earth.
So this was the Souls of Mischief song. I think they were like teenagers from the early 90s, called Step to My Girl. I listen to the song all the time, and I always thought it was like really beautiful. I didn't know what the samples were though, so I didn't know too much about the origins of it, but I always just knew I really liked this song called Step to My Girl. At some point, you know, sometimes you just start singing in your head, and I guess I sang something that kind of took part of the melody from the saxophone. And then took the line. There's always something I really liked about that line. There's something about every time I see you in the world.
Brothers get jealous when I'm chilling with my dip. Just because she's flyer, you try to play me like...
Start working on it. So then, of course, when you're working on a song, you got to start saying like, well, okay, what am I actually referencing here? Because I believe good music is full of references, but you can't just like, melodies have to be cleared. That's how our law works. So then I had to look up what Souls of Mischief had sampled. And what they sampled was a song called Aubrey by the saxophonist Grover Washington Jr. from the 70s. But then what, of course, I didn't know, but I found out, was that this is a cover of a song called Aubrey, written by Bread.
And Aubrey was her name, a not so very ordinary girl or name, but who's to blame?
Little did I know that what I was actually basing the melody off was not Souls of Mischief, was not even Grover Washington Jr., but was Bread, this like real, just kind of smooth 70s easy list. So this is the original song that the melody comes from.
Like a lovely melody that everyone can sing. Take away the words that rhyme, it doesn't mean a thing.
So that's basically it. When you get down to it, what I interpolated in the song is,
and Aubrey was her name, and Aubrey was her name. The gloves are off, the wisdom teeth are out. But where was June?
So we talked to Souls of Mischief because, of course, we reached out to them.
and say, we're basing it off these elements of your song, but it turned out the elements of the song that we were basing it off of were not actually their intellectual property. So they were like, well, you know, we sampled Grover Washington Jr., and then we're like, well, that's a cover of Bread. And then we said, well, the other part that we kind of reference in our song is the chorus. Because remember, their song, the chorus goes, every time I see you in the world, you always step to my girl. Yep. And they're like, well, that's a sample, too. So it sounded like that probably was a sample. I wasn't, like, shocked, but I was like, all right, well, what's the sample? And they're like, well, the sample is this, not obscure, but, like, not super well-known New Jersey 90s rapper called YZ. And they sampled his voice on their song, and it came from his song called Who's That Girl?
Every time I see you in the world, you always step to my girl. Let's stop the nonsense, cause it doesn't make good sense. I should've just let her stroll in the cheddar. So every time she sees you, she could just take off and you could just let off steam by screaming.
Ultimately, I was kind of riffing on this Soul to Mischief song, but then turns out I'm actually riffing on Bread and YZ. We all grew up listening to all sorts of music. People sample stuff. Grover Washington knew this Bread song, wanted to cover. It is kind of just how music is.
Here's your third disc, baby. She and I are real close, a uno and a dos, a real good loving. No pushing, no shoving, just true togetherness, whatever's clever. I said no, so she'll say never. Stand right by me, for better, for worse. This is the last verse of our conversation. Here's the situation, idiocy, idiot. So you better get hip to it. You used to be my missus, but now you blow me kisses because you missed it. I know your wishes, they won't come true. This is from me to you.
Traded for you, ages and on, still not the truth. We saw the stars when they hid from the world. You cursed the sun when I stepped to your girl. Maybe she's gone and I can't resurrect her. The truth is she doesn't need me to protect her.
I loved Eleanor Rigby, the Beatles song, and I loved the 1812 Overture by Tchaikovsky. I used to listen to that alone in my house. So I had certain, you know, music that was in my heart, or however you want to say it. Sure. But I didn't really put it together.
I can't do it alone. I can't do it alone.
You hope that in some way, whether musically, lyrically, thematically, your music could only exist in this current moment. And from the very beginning, we always hated the idea, and we'd always kind of check ourselves to make sure we weren't doing anything that we thought was just kind of retro or vintage or just recreating something from the past. As much as we like to reference types of music, that was always kind of a danger zone that we wanted to avoid.
I want to know how to break up like adults. I've been with the same boy for 3 years, which is a long time at our age. He loves me, but I just don't love him anymore. I know I need to break up with him, but I don't want any drama, and I don't want to hurt him. He's such a good boy. Please help me, otherwise I'll stay with him, and then I'll have to kill myself or murder him in his sleep.
Wow, I can't believe they sent us this question.
But I cannot believe it.
For the first time in our band's history, we recorded all of the drums and a lot of the bass to analog tape, and we did it in this old studio that was built in the 30s, which is now called Vox.
It is 8:15, the night of March 13th, 1997, and suddenly, over the skies of Poland, Arizona, what is described as a giant, brightly lit boomerang soars through the air, slowly and silently.
Point.
Thousands of people are amazed.
Plain and simple, do you think it is a spacecraft? It may be.
And the studio has linoleum floors, and it's just has this quality that when you capture sound inside of it, you're also capturing the sound of that old room.
From day one, I've always been obsessed with the idea of quality control. You imagine how hard the world is going to judge your music. You have to judge yourself even more harshly.
We wrote a lot of songs, and we didn't keep them. There were a lot of songs. Every time we sort of get these batches of songs every few weeks or few months, and we weren't precious with them. If a song wasn't good enough, we let it die.
And then Hannah Hunt, that actually I started writing based on a real person that I knew in college. She was somebody I used to sit next to in Indo-Tibetan Buddhism class. And I always thought she had such a great name. But the funny thing is that I'd always mispronounce her name. So her name is, the girl that we know from college, her name is Hannah Hunt. In some ways it's funny because that song, it wouldn't have fit on the first album because it's not like a college-y song. It feels a little older. I never went on a road trip with her or anything. But then it wasn't finished until, Rostand writes the piano part, bong gung gung gung, or then he also wrote that he had the idea for it to get really big.
We wanted every song on the record to, feel like a complete statement, and we worked really hard on that. So you have our longest songs and our shortest songs. I think it's going to be a good record.
I'm a little burned out from working on it so hard, but I really can't wait for everybody to hear it.
And we always have a vision, but on this record, we just felt like we had to keep going. Like we didn't want to settle, and we wanted this record to be really special. So we just kept at it, sort of.
We didn't know for sure that these albums would feel like a trilogy until we finished them, but it does feel like maybe the end of some kind of era. But we're excited. We kind of feel like we can do whatever we want with our next album, so just have to wait and see.
Take your time, young man. You take your time.
I kind of feel like I think more time needs to pass before I can have a knowledge of what I feel about it or what I felt about it even. But I would say that change coincided with another change in my life, which was moving from New York to Los Angeles.